This program is organized by a few different entities coming together. It's a collaboration between MWA Architects and the University of Oregon School of Architecture and Environment Spatial Justice Initiative, supported, of course, by Design Week Portland 2020. And I'd like to announce off the bat that this session is being recorded. The book project that we're talking about today is also supported by an AI in New York Bruner Grant for architectural research. So this all started in before times. Both Diana, who's with MWA, and you'll meet momentarily, and we both worked in this building, which contains the Portland outpost of the School of Architecture and Environment at UO, and also contains MWA Architects. So I was really thrilled when she invited me to collaborate with her firm on a Design Week proposal, and we're also really happy only a number of the Design Week programs that were meant for the physical in-person version of this, only a number were invited to continue forward as Design Week went virtual. So we're very happy to be part of this. So I'm here presenting some work that I've done as part of my faculty fellowship in design for spatial justice at the University of Oregon School of Architecture and Environment. So people ask, what does spatial justice mean? In my view, the sort of simplest way to say that is it's how social justice shows up in the built environment. So I'm super lucky to be among the first class of fellows, 2019-20 fellows. There are 6 of us. And the program spans the school's architecture, interior architecture, landscape architecture, historic preservation programs in Eugene and Portland. And the way that the director of the school, Erin Moore, describes it, the goal is to change the voices that are at the table in order to change the kinds of questions that can be brought to the table. So all of us are doing research and teaching aligned with spatial justice. And for those of you who are just meeting me, I am originally from California. I've spent the last 16 years in New York. My training is in architecture. I'm an urbanist focused on housing and health equity. I was the first director of the Institute for Public Architecture, and I'm the editor of this publication, Housing as an Intervention, Architecture Towards Social Equity. So this fellowship has brought me back to the West Coast. So a little run of show so you know what we're about to do. We are going to, this is basically a program in 2 parts. You're going to hear a little bit from me, but most importantly from some of the students I've been collaborating with to hear about the research that we've been working on. This is the first time that anyone is seeing this. And then we're going to go into breakout sessions where we'll be hearing from you. We're very excited to hear from you what you think about the beta case studies that we're presenting. From there, we'll go into this phenomenal panel. I am really thrilled that this group of people is joining us. We have architects, developers, community advocates. It will be moderated by Joseph Gallivan of the Portland Tribune. I'll introduce all of these amazing speakers later in the program. So what is this book? What is Good Neighbors? So in 1997, some Bay Area architects, Tom Jones, Mike Pyretalk, and Willie Pettis, published Good Neighbors, Affordable Family Housing. So this was really the first truly authoritative guide to modern affordable housing design. So a richly illustrated book with case studies, resident profiles, and policy and design guidance. And if you talk to a certain generation of housing designers and advocates, they'll say this is an indispensable resource. I know a lot of people personally who say this book really changed their careers and got them into housing. So now we're over 2 decades later, affordable housing is now a much more robust industry, and I don't have to tell this crowd that the demand for quality low-cost housing has surged, leading to an urgent need for an expanded and updated resource. So at the moment, we are in the research phase for Good Neighbors 2, a comprehensive guide to affordable housing design in the United States. So I am working in collaboration with original authors to produce this new book and online resource. So the new version will showcase exemplary current affordable housing case studies from across the country. And we're going to revisit a few projects from the original publication to evaluate their success over time. Who's the audience for this? You, I hope. The audience will address, the book will address architects, developers, students, and communities at large considering affordable housing in their neighborhoods, and will examine the role of below-market housing in promoting health equity, economic, racial, and environmental justice. So, normally when I describe what gets me out of bed every day and the inequalities that we are addressing, I use this pair of slides from New York, where in East Harlem, life expectancy is only 76 years old. Right next door, Upper East Side, it's 85. So right in our backyards, we have a 9-year gap in life expectancy. And for those who haven't been to New York lately, we know, of course, that there's a big difference racially and economically between these two adjoining neighborhoods. The Upper East Side is much whiter and richer. But today, of course, this is even more urgent than it was just a few months ago. Our pandemic combined with the mass protests of the Black Lives Matter movement, with all eyes on Portland, has more people focused on the fact that Black Americans disproportionately live in unsheltered or overcrowded settings correlated with COVID risk. So the pandemic has exposed housing inequalities that every day contribute to shortened Black lives. Also, to give a little bit of context, just last week, the Portland City Council passed the Residential Infill Project, which extends and exceeds the requirement of the House Bill 2001, which ends single-family zoning across the state. So that's a little bit of context for our conversation today. Our arguments for this project are incredibly simple. 1, housing is healthcare, and 2, housing justice is racial justice. Our goal is also straightforward. That's healthy, dignified, permanently affordable homes for all. And we hope this resource will help those of you who are working towards that goal to reach that more easily. And we have 2 basic questions that I want in the back of your mind today. So we really hope that the resources we're working on, that you're helping us with today, will really be a tool or a set of design tools. So we want to ask you, what design tools do you need? What do we need to be able to create healthy, dignified homes for all? And then thinking about, what does it mean? We want to have the best affordable housing developments in the country in this book. So what does that mean? How should we measure the success of affordable housing developments? So briefly, a few thank yous, because I'm welcoming you, but this is a big team bringing this together. So thank you to the University of Oregon Student Research Team and the facilitators today. A lot of names there, and they're in your the issue document that you got to look at. The original Good Neighbors authors, Tom Jones, Mike Piatak, and Willie Pettis. The Spatial Justice Initiative has supported this, especially grateful to Erin Moore, Nancy Chang, and Justin Fowler. I think Nancy and Justin are meant to be here today. And this Zoom meeting is happening because Sean Sharp is making it work. And then we had 4 firms who offered to be guinea pigs in this process. You'll be seeing their work today. So thank you so much to MWA, Duval Decker, Kirsten Ginsburg, and HiArc. Oops. And last but not least, it has been such a pleasure to co-organize this with Diana, Olivia, and Allison from MWA, both when we hope to have this in their beautiful St. Francis development, which you all should go visit and, you know, if that's possible in the future, and now in the digital realm. So now, Diana, if you'd like to say hello, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Diana Mooseman, and I'm with MWA Architects. We're a firm that's been passionate about affordable housing since we began 32 years ago. So as Karen said, we met in the U of O building in a studio review that I was invited to. She was teaching a design studio on racial justice and kind of gentrified Northeast Portland. And Cleo and Kayeen Talton Davis were co-teaching the studio with her, and they're longtime Northeast residents, and they were working on an art project for one of our projects. I too am part of the gentrification problem because I've lived in Northeast Portland very happily for the last 30 years. So I feel the pain of gentrification So going to the studio review was super refreshing because it was the most diverse studio review panel, and there was a whole cadre of African-American kids running around looking at the projects and getting excited about architecture. And that was the first time I had seen that at a studio. I was so energized and jazzed by it that I introduced myself to Karen and became very interested in her work. Hence the birth of this event. So thank you, Karen. So I'm very excited. Thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited for us all to kind of dig deep into think critically about what makes the best affordable housing for our time right now in 2020. So thank you all for joining us.
Great, thank you so much, Diana. And you're reminding me that's how I met Akasha Lauren Spence, was through that studio as well. And Devati did a program with us then. Okay, I'm just going back to this. So now I'm going to stop talking and turn it to Carolina Da Silva and Ian Cunningham, two of my amazing students from the seminar that was operating in parallel to this book project to present some of their work.
Hi, my name is Carolina, and I recently graduated in the Master of Architecture program at UO, and I was one of the students involved in the Good Neighbors seminar class. You can go to the next slide. So I guess we can say that our class was divided in two cycles, being one of them more concerned about the learning process of affordable housing, and the second one into how do we convey this information, which format, and understanding all these types of and ways of organizing the content that we learned. And we had this great team of students, me, Ian, and a couple of others that couldn't join us today, but you can go next, and I'm gonna start explaining a little bit of our first cycle. Our first cycle was composed about how do we define the problem of affordable housing, and we did that through weekly readings and class discussion. And after analyzing the arguments that in the range of articles of different aspects of affordable housing and the problem and everything, we gathered, and we together as a group of 8 students, we developed, you can go next, and we developed this nice small pamphlet which we wrote, we designed, and we edited everything together, and we synthesized all that we have learned in the past weeks that we discussed affordable housing, and together into a project that we thought it would synthesize a little bit of the problems that we thought it was important to us and to the audience that we chose for.
My name is Ian Cunningham. I'm a graduate student of architecture at the University of Oregon, and I was in Karen's class in the winter as well. And so I'm going to talk about what we did after examining the surrounding issues of affordable housing in the United States, is that we looked at examples of case studies that were published. And we're trying to figure out how to best present exemplary affordable housing projects in an illuminating and legible manner. Each of us looked at a different case study format, and oh, can you go to the next slide? Sorry. Okay. Oh, you're already there, sorry. So yeah, we looked at each case study and analyzed it, looked at what information was included and what information was left out in the visual hierarchy of the pages. Next slide. And which aspects of the project were emphasized. Next slide. Then working in pairs, we crafted our first attempt of our own case studies looking at cellar apartments in Eugene, the first certified passive house multifamily affordable housing project in the United States, and designed by Bergs and Delaney Architecture and Planning. And we went on a field trip to visit cellar apartments, which was a really amazing opportunity, and got to get a tour by one of the architects. Next. And then we created 4 case studies working in pairs. So we did St. Francis Park Apartments in Portland, Oregon by MWA Architects, Midtown Affordable Housing, Jackson, Mississippi by Duval Decker Architects, 515 Blake Avenue in Brooklyn, New York by Curtis and Ginsburg Architects, and Keauhou Lane in Honolulu by Hierarchy. Yeah, and so Karen Kubey put us in touch with the architects of the projects, and we interviewed them, as well as some other individuals involved in the projects, such as the developers. And so here's an example of one of the case studies. This is one that I worked on with my partner, Shirley. And so in the overall layout is in the first page, you have a map showing the context, and you have a kind of an overview. And there's also some information which is pulled out of the text to make it easy for people to quickly read as they're skimming through. And then, next slide. Each case study also contains photos of the exterior, the common spaces, and the unit interiors. This project was designed by MWA Architects, which is where Diane Moosman, who's one of the co-organizers of today's event, works. And I actually interviewed her as part of the project, which was really a great opportunity to get some insight into how affordable housing actually gets produced in today. And also Travis Phillips is here today from Catholic Charities Oregon, the developer of the project. So yeah, that's what we've worked on in the winter.
Great, thank you so much, Ian and Carolina, for that very efficient, excellent presentation of the work. And we had a lot of fun in the class. It was extremely collaborative. They pushed me to try different things. It was a lot of fun, so it's nice to have a little reunion. I couldn't help but slip in a little bit more framing as we transition into the breakout rooms. I think, for me, this quote is pretty helpful. The built form of housing has always been seen as a tangible, visual reflection of the organization of society. It reveals existing class structure and power relationships. This next piece is for all the designers in the house. But it has also long been a vehicle for imagining alternative social orders. So I see, really strong parallels between the Black Lives Matter protests happening in the streets and the work that all of us are doing in housing. So now we're really going to stop talking. It's your turn. We have these breakout sessions that will last 30 minutes, and then we'll have a quick report out moving into the panel. So this is what you're about to be in the good hands of our student facilitators. So this is your chance to give feedback on these Beta Good Neighbors housing case studies. And I should say, you really are the first people seeing this. So these have not been fact-checked. These have not been proofread. So be kind, please, and don't bother us about the typos that surely exist. But we're really looking at the big picture here. We're thinking we want this to be incredibly useful to you and to people like you. So we want to hear from you what's working in this version, what's missing, and what would make this really helpful for you? What kind of information do you need? What format do you need to make this useful for you, to make this useful if you're trying to convince your client, if you're trying to convince your neighbor, whatever you need. This is your chance to bother us with all of that information. So now I want to thank and turn it to our student facilitators, Ian Cunningham, Luigi Gersi. Now my screen is doing this thing. Sorry, 1 second. Holly Nuovo, Carolina Silva da Silva, and Mackenzie Vanco. Okay, Sean, activate the breakout rooms, please.
Okay, if you don't get into a breakout room right away, just be patient and we'll get you into one. We set them up ahead of time and have entered people into them, so here we go.
Oh, okay.
Hi, we're back.
Nice to see everyone again. I hope you had fun in your groups. So now we're going to very briefly, I'm actually super curious. This is real and I really do want to know what you think. So let's have at it. So very briefly, I'm going to call on each of the facilitators to give us, their high level, what were the most important things you talked about? So we'll do that really quick, and then we'll move into the last portion of the program, which is our amazing panel. So let's start. How about Holly? Do you want to go first? Tell us about what your room talked about.
Yeah, we had a really great room, and I've got a lot of notes for you, so it's going to be great. We focused a lot in this quick facts area to make sure that the information was easy to reference. Talking about a further breakdown of cost. We also talked more generally about the book itself and having a organization of the book to make it easy to reference projects of a certain region or density or construction type. Then we also, on that vein of kind of the book at large, we also talked about delving into specific units and how those might be deployed. And then just as a final note, much interest on the user groups and the population demographics where it was appreciated.
Great, thank you. And you reminded me, of course, the book will be more than, the case studies are really at the heart of it. It'll be more than that. But today we wanted to focus on that portion. Okay, Carolina, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna try to go a little bit quicker. So I guess that things that we were talking about is try to see if there's a way of comparing the case studies, either a matrix where you can see the different types of units and different types of incomes and groups that were being assigned to each housing. And another thing that it could be useful is having a pro forma where you can see the finances and having an understanding of the cost of construction comparing to the units and the quality of the overall project. And I guess also something else that was really nice to hear is try to convey more information about the challenges of making this specific project affordable. So what was the decision-making process and what it made something that what was supposed to be left, what is supposed to be added. So these types of information. And last but not least, having a variety of scales, so different types of budgets, something bigger, something smaller. So it's easy to compare and see what is the quality in each one of them. And lastly, I guess that having information about the architects. So if you want to look for inspiration and you want to talk about the person who developed this project, you have it. You can reach out and see, hey, I liked your project in this book, and let's chat a little bit, this type of thing. And there are a lot of other notes and things to move forward, but definitely I'll keep the rest in mind.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Carolina. And
Yeah.
you know, the challenges part, I think the crew here today knows that, you know, I'm smiling, but and these are great projects, but none of this is easy. So I like that part about it, and thinking about getting into the nitty gritty, and then maybe with that last part, maybe we can get some people some work. Okay, let's go to Ian.
Hi. So some of the topics that came up, one of them was user engagement and community engagement. So kind of including in each case study, like how the design team reached out to people in the community and to users to, you know, have them include them in the design process. Also, like we talked about the graphical hierarchy, trying to quickly show, like at a glance, like what were some of the kind of core themes of the project, you know, and maybe some trade-offs in the project. So like it focused on this more and not as much on this, which I guess that could be something that you could do by grouping different projects together into like chapters within the book. Another thing that came up a lot was who the audience is for the book. So what kind of information would be most useful to, you know, developers versus architects versus students. Like one of the things that came up was showing the kind of stages of the process, like what, you know, kind of in a narrative way, like, or in a timeline, like the different phases of design and like what happened, because it's not always a smooth process in reality. So, you know, looking at issues that came up during the project, and also like who is present, you know, who has a seat at the table, like in terms of the design team, like who's represented. And I guess finally, is there some way that we could include information about, you know, after the building was built, like how did it actually hold up to its intentions? Like did it meet, was it successful in achieving its goals? So, yeah.
Right.
But interesting topics.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian, and to the group that gave that good feedback. I mean, there's a theme of time in what you're talking about, right? Not only making sure to talk not only about the beautiful project that gets done, but how did we get there, and how were people involved or not, residents and community members, and then after that, maybe it's great day one, but does it hold up? And I hope that going back to some of the original case studies from 20 years ago will help with that question. So let's go next to Mackenzie, please.
Hi, yeah, at a high level, I think one of the things we really first started talking about was that same idea of being able to open the page and be really able to quickly digest the information. So really clear, consistent graphics between each of the case studies. But also just a level of why was this particular project allowed to make the cut? What are the categories behind what makes this a great project, and defining those specifically and having that in a really quick graphic at the very beginning. Also thinking about some of the community spaces and the spaces that are outside the actual project. What's important within the community, highlighting that, like why was that particular site chosen, but in a graphic way, not just within the text. And you know, the use of headings and breaking down that text. We also talked about the importance of community spaces within the building, especially when the building is mixed use between affordable and market rate use. How do those come together in community spaces? And then finally, thinking about the actual deliverable, we talked a little bit about why a designer or developer would use this resource, and thinking about if it was something that was able to evolve over time or be maybe an online resource that someone could go to, like someone said, Divisair, the Atlas of Architecture, just different ideas for how this can be digestible.
Great, I love it. Now I'm sort of curious who was in your group delivering that very helpful graphic critique, and then thinking about which projects make the cut. That's a great connection to our panel when we're thinking, how do you define success? And therefore, how should we curate which projects get into the book? And then, the question of, just to clarify a little bit, we are making a book, a physical book, but it is 2020 and it'll be later than that when it comes out. So also exploring what digital resources make sense. So last but not least, our fearless facilitator, Luigi, please.
Hi, I was actually part of two groups, so some of this information may overlap with Carolina's. So at first we talked a little bit about the metrics and what it will be an appropriate amount of metrics that will be included in the program, or in the project in particular. We talked about maybe having proformas or some sort of more tangible forms of data comparison between projects, perhaps through the proforma. We talked about what type of state funding support each project has. And we also talked about the ecological performance of each building. Something that we kind of talked about was as climate change it becomes more of an emergency and it is more tied in with socioeconomic status and in populations, then that will become also a mediator into what it will be a successful affordable housing project. Other things that we talked about in the other group were what type of support spaces and amenities they incorporate to their community and include them in the list. We also talked about the community engage. How do they engage with the community? And also list of funders. That was something that we also talked about, and having some sort of maybe not perhaps necessarily talk about them by name, but perhaps the type of funders and the type of organizations that were behind these particular projects. We also talked about using these projects and how these projects become a starting point for families that allow them to grow and eventually maybe move to other forms of permanent residences, and that can be used as a metric for how successful these projects are. Perhaps some sort of a timeline or some sort of a way to kind of indicate the transition in between of the user throughout their time engaging with with the projects. Also, one thing was the information about MEI was very good and was very helpful, and perhaps also having more context in regards to the cost of square foot per project, perhaps some sort of a context, because the square foot of a project in New York perhaps is not the same one as one in Arizona. So having some sort of metric or some sort of information that kind of gives more context, maybe geographically or maybe historically even, about what that square footage means in regards to that specific project. And finally, perhaps more metrics or information about the type of population and demographics that inhabit these particular projects, and understanding what are the types of families, how do they engage with the building, and more information about their family functions, or the way how their family works.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luigi. And you're reminding me, we have so many overlapping crises that the ecological one is not to be forgotten, and certainly will be foregrounded. So thank you so much to everyone. And also, one of the goals of this is also, there are a lot of students who are really, really, really interested in gaining experience in community engagement. So that was another goal of this program. So thanks to the students who helped with that, and I hope learned something about how to facilitate. And I just want to say hi really quick. Nancy, I thanked you earlier, but thanks for coming and for supporting the Spatial Justice Initiative, and Peter Keys, a super important housing professor at Oregon who's joining us today and has helped out a lot. So here we go. 1 second. Okay. Finally, we come to our panel. So what we're doing now is moving from a national discussion to a more local one, where we get to hear from amazing people doing different kinds of work, all toward similar goals in Portland. So what we're going to try for this is, please, I know you have a lot of questions. I can hear, you already have questions right now. I can feel it. So what we're going to try is send them to me. I'll feed them to our moderator. So we're going to do it that way to try to organize it a little bit. So just use the chat function, please, to send those to me. And if there are questions specifically for me, we really want to hear from the people doing on the ground work in Portland. But if you have questions specifically for me, at the end, I'll give a link where you can ask me everything you want that you didn't get a chance to. Okay. Now I am really happy that I get the chance to introduce our phenomenal panel. And not only were we happy that they could join us, but they also, they committed to the in-person thing that was meant to be in April. We're super happy they could arrange their schedules to join us virtually as well. So from left to right, we have Akasha Lawrence Spence. I mentioned that we got to meet in a review similar to Diana and I. Akasha she has two important affiliations. One is with Fifth Element, which is there, but also super importantly, she's a state representative serving District 36. So Akasha is the founder and principal designer at Fifth Element, a conscientious real estate development firm fortifying small businesses through commercial property ownership. And her mission is to act as an incubator for economic growth, creating ecosystems in which collaboration and hybridization of work fosters self-sustaining, resilient communities. Dave Adi from Holst Architecture is an architect and partner at Holst, where he pursues elegant solutions to clients' needs while remaining dedicated to modern and sustainable designs that enhance their context. His experience of over 20 years on a wide variety of building types has honed his abilities to problem solve, communicate, and build consensus with project stakeholders to create places people love. And Dave, as I mentioned, was part of a health and housing panel we got to do back in the real world. So thank you for joining us again. Rose Ojeda of Casa of Oregon. I saw you mentioned in the comments something about your connection to St. Francis, so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that in the conversation. So a belief in housing as a right, here, drives Rose's commitment to creating healthy homes in thriving communities. Rose brings more than, we have a contest here. Rose brings more than 26 years of experience in the real estate industry as a broker, developer, and asset manager. She's also helped, this is also super important. We're not just talking about new housing, but preserving housing, preserving existing affordable housing and developing new affordable housing throughout Oregon. Then welcoming Travis Phillips from Catholic Charities of Oregon. He's worked in housing, design, and construction industries for nearly 20 years. He joined Catholic Charities in 2018 as its Director of Community Development and Housing, helping the organization expand its housing portfolio and being involved in the St. Francis as well. And then you met Diana, but in case you missed it, she is the lead design architect for MWA and the lead designer for the St. Francis Park Apartments. She is passionate about creating livable, healthy neighborhoods and is an expert in community-oriented design. It looks like she wins here. Her expertise comes with 30 years of architectural experience, spent designing many different project types, but knitting them all together for the greater community. And then last but not least, I'm returning it now to our moderator. We got to meet Joseph in a site visit of the St. Francis in before times, and he's so brilliant, and we're really happy to have him provoking our panelists. So Joseph of the Portland Tribune is a business reporter covering ACE amongst other topics. He has written for The Guardian of London and the New York Post, and presents a radio show about art on Kubey every Tuesday called Art Focus. So I will turn it to you, Joseph.
Thank you to the panelists for showing up. Maybe we could quickly go around. My immediate question is, where do you see the appetite for building affordable housing coming from? Who is really pushing to build it, and who's standing in the way? I mean, we have our architects, politicians, on this great panel. So could you give a bit of an overview? It seems to be a popular thing. Portland's changed the law to build more affordable housing. Just tell us who's behind the push to get it done. Perhaps we could start with Diana, because she's actually built some.
Oh, sure. Well, it's been interesting because NIMBYism used to be a thing when you would go to neighborhood associations and present an affordable housing project. People had a lot of concerns. Nowadays, when you go to a neighborhood association meeting, people are very excited to hear that your project is an affordable housing project. And there's a lot of support for that. And so I think that the drive has come just from the lack of affordable units in Portland. And I think the bond measures through Metro and the city have helped finance that, but I'm sure Travis and Rose can speak to that more directly. But it seems like there's a lot of really positive momentum for affordable housing right now in the city.
I was thinking, Akasha, when you're around politicians, what do they think when the term affordable housing comes up? Is there a kind of reaction, an instant reaction?
So I'm going to correct you a little bit, Joseph. It's Akasha.
Sorry.
No worries. I kind of want to comment a little bit on what Diana said, and I think what happens often in political circles is that you're listening to your constituents, you're listening to the people. And for a long time, I was previously on the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and for a long time, residential infill was not popular. And there was a lot of NIMBYism that happened in the city council chambers when we were talking about it. I testified in favor of it, and there were still community members who were vehemently opposed to it. We have, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Joseph, that there were lawsuits from the Laurelhurst neighborhood, from all kinds of other communities, with trying to preserve the historical character of their communities instead of have affordable housing being built. Because I think the most predominant thing that has changed in the last few years is not the need for affordable housing, but who needs it. The demographics of who needs affordable housing. It's no longer just your low income and your extremely low income constituents and Portlanders and Oregonians. It's now professionals, young professionals who have quote unquote living wage jobs but are straddled with student loan debt and are unable to afford the types of housing that was promised to them by this American dream. And so, essentially, you're seeing some communities turn the corner on it because it's their kids. It's people that look like them that now need affordable housing. And so, I think the conversation, in Salem and throughout our state is that we've known that we've had a housing crisis for a long time. We know that houselessness is a huge issue in our state, across our state. We know that now with COVID-19 and these eviction moratoriums that are set to expire, that is going to coalesce into a new kind of housing crisis, one of which our state has never seen before, a magnitude of which our state has never seen before. And so the appetite for affordable housing has to change because people are uncomfortable when there are houseless people in their community. People are uncomfortable going downtown right now because of the tensing that is happening, the mass tensing that is happening, because so many people are pushed out of the streets. So for me, the appetite for affordable housing has always been there. I think in terms of our political circles, it's those same neighbors and people who have been resistant because they want to preserve a historical character that is rooted in racism and exclusion and segregation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Akasha. Travis, you with Catholic Charities. How does Catholic Charities approach affordable housing, and how did you get into? You're connected to the St. Francis Park Apartments, correct?
Yeah, so I'll say, Catholic Charities has been acquiring and developing affordable housing for just a little over 20 years. I've been developing affordable housing in Portland for 10 of those, but only the last couple with Catholic Charities. So, that said, we have a very broad focus when it relates to affordable housing, a very broad portfolio of housing, serving all sorts of folks in all sorts of neighborhoods. So that goes to properties that not specifically, but predominantly serve communities of color or refugees or other racially or ethnically specific populations, and we make sure that the programming that we have to support those residents is culturally responsive and culturally thoughtful for their needs. We have housing that serves seniors. We have housing that's specific to people with disabilities, including severe persistent mental illness and other intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then housing that serves the broader low-income working families and individuals as well. So I wouldn't say that we have one specific focus in terms of population or an area that we've worked in particular, but we really try to identify the needs that are there in the community and frankly the needs that sometimes aren't being well served by others. And so you'll see that if not the development side, what I'm about to speak to is not on the development side, but on our service side, our housing transitions program that serves self-identified homeless women and provides a drop-in center for them, provides street outreach. And one of the things that then our housing does once we build it is it provides that opportunity for us to refer those residents in so that then they can take the support that they've got from our service programs and leverage that for stability once they're in housing and become stable and productive tenants. So to go back a little bit to one of the prior questions, to the earlier part of the question about what are the opportunities or roadblocks that we see, Diana pointed out that our recent, in particular, focus here locally with some bond measures and a homeless services tax that we just passed in May. Thank you to everyone that voted for that. It's critically important to be able to provide the services to folks. We really have an incredible groundswell of financial support to do this work. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to explain to the folks who voted for those measures that it takes easily 2 to 3 years to get an affordable housing project from a concept to a development that folks can get moved into. And so I think that's an important thing to recognize as we're talking about affordable housing and building support for it, is that this work doesn't happen overnight. It actually is a very long process, unfortunately. And so sometimes our public officials and our public bureaus are our greatest allies to make that happen. And sometimes they put some roadblocks out there that make it more difficult and sometimes more expensive for us as well. And the best of times they listen carefully to our conversations with them about how to smooth that out a little bit easier and make affordable housing faster and easier to develop. But I know sometimes our desire to address all of our social challenges, whether that's employment, whether that's housing, whether that is economics, sometimes you can't do everything all at once, even though we really want to.
Thank you. Dave, you're at Holst Architecture. Can you talk a little bit about the design challenges of building affordable housing? I sort of can't imagine an architect doodling affordable housing, maybe they think bigger than that. They daydream about grandiose buildings. What's changed? What about this book, Good Neighbors, inspired people to get into designing affordable housing? And what are the kind of you know, the design tricks maybe and new ways of designing a building that make it different from just putting up another box for people to live in?
Thanks for the question, Joseph. I think when you're trying to come up with new ideas of how to design affordable housing, well, first of all, I enjoy designing affordable housing because we're designing homes for people, and we spend so much time in our homes, and it's important that everybody have good design and not just people who can afford it. So that's one of the reasons why I enjoy affordable housing so much. But there can tend to be a formula to affordable housing that is there for a reason, right? There's reasons why people do things a certain way because they've been proven to work over the years or to be efficient. So trying to find new ways of creating better housing is always a challenge. So there's a few things that we try to do to move the needle to create better affordable housing. And one of them is to really focus on where you can have the most impact. So, you know, keeping some things very simple, but then having other things that can be exuberant or be really special places for communities in affordable housing. So, you know, I see Mike Steffens on the call here. He would be cheering this on, I think, where you try to keep some things just very regularized and repeated over time, and then you have other areas of the project where there can be something very special that happens. Another thing that we look at is different new typologies. Right now, there's a big push to try and think of housing not just as 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, but are there co-housing models? Are there ADU models? We've got a new zoning code that allows all sorts of different duplexes, triplexes, quads, missing middle housing. So not just you know, how do you improve the typical type of housing, but how do you explore new types of housing that might be, you know, something that's been done in the past or in other cultures, but not so much in America. So I think typologies are another great place for design exploration.
Mm-hmm. In the building sort of as the backdrop that people are using today, you know, the St. Francis Park apartments, there is the hallways are, well, Diana, can you tell us about the hallways? Because they have a lot of light and they have a particular function for this building.
I think we try to kind of create moments for community and people to come together. And I feel like that's a kind of subtext of St. Francis is how can, when you're walking through the hallway, can you visually connect and orient to the outside as you come across the bridge, or bulge the width of the corridor out at a point and have a place where there's a community bookshelf or community library. So I think that's, you know, the light is to orient people to the outside, and then kind of create opportunities for people to pause outside the elevator and get to know their neighbors. So that's a huge emphasis of the project and something that we always think about.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything special about the park? You know, you took over an old park and turned it into a garden. How's that going? Because we all know that 12th and Stark is pretty much a homeless camp, and it's you've got a fence around your garden. So what's how are people using this space?
I wonder if Travis could almost speak to that, how it is currently. I haven't, that when I was at the garden last summer, it was super vibrant and really exciting to see things grown in and people really using that garden space. I'm curious, you know, how it is now, but it connects the garden. The intention of the garden was there is a vacated street to the north, and that is a public space, and the garden is like a semi-private, semi-public space just for the residents. So there is a fence separating the vacated street to the north and the garden, but visually it was meant to kind of give back a sense of the green space that the park gave to the neighborhood visually, even though the public cannot access the garden. And that the intention was to kind of connect to the dining hall. So eventually, or you know, initially it was been envisioned as a garden that could potentially grow food for the adjacent dining hall that St. Francis operates to feed the homeless.
Yeah, so I can build on what Diana said and confirm that the garden space really is a fantastic amenity for the residents. It really has been well used and appreciated by the residents. It hasn't necessarily turned into a farm to table supply for the dining hall next door yet. But I'll confirm that that's really a fantastic amenity for the residents too, and that's really their private outdoor space there. The proximity to the rest of the neighborhood has been, was in some degree the motivation for the development in the first place, understanding that homelessness has definitely had has congregated in that area over the years, and it was very apparent that the need was there for the housing. And the housing here definitely serves some of the lowest income folks, with a number of the units specifically dedicated to people who have been formerly homeless. But I will say that our ongoing challenges with homelessness here in Portland create a unique challenge here at the St. Francis Park Apartments as well. Many of the residents who are moving into housing from homelessness really have some unique challenges with the volume of homelessness that's on the street next to them. And we see that happen in one of two ways, and really requires a higher level of service to the residents for support, as well as management. The homelessness and some of the issues that happen with the particular groups that seem to congregate nearby make it sometimes difficult for some of our residents who are now in the building to address some of the challenges that either they acquired while they were homelessness or caused them to become homeless in the first place, whether that's criminal activity or drug use or other things, with it happening so near them. It is that much more difficult to address those issues that they're trying to work on, that help, and addressing those will help ensure their stability in housing. And then I'll say there's a unique challenge with, it could be described a little bit as a type of survivor complex, but it's also when folks have moved from the street into housing, there's a desire to take care of your friends. That's been in your community when you've been out on the street, and now that you're in housing, it's like, well, I want to invite them in because I want they're my support network, and I also want to take care of them. But that potentially creates lease issues, and folks who are not tenants in the building being housed there, and potentially has the opportunity to destabilize the residents that are moving into housing. And so that's created some unique challenges for us to ensure that we're supporting the residents well and helping them address and deal with.
Thanks a lot. Rose, could you say a little bit about the idea of affordable housing in rural areas? We tend to think, if you go live in a rural area, it's about as cheap as it gets. But why is there a drive to build, affordable housing in some of the places you have seen?
Sure. Well, CASA Oregon actually specializes in developing housing for farm workers. So naturally, there's a lot of need for farm worker housing in rural communities. But there are also farm workers who live in urban areas as well, and then have to commute to those rural communities for the actual work. In terms of the need, there is it's always a challenge to support to our public funders the the number of housing units we want to develop in rural Oregon, because at least during the recession, populations were declining in rural Oregon. So that was a very challenging time for us, and it was not unusual for us to require 5 to 6 years to bring a project to fruition, because justifying the need for the housing was really tough with the population declines. And so what ended up happening is there were few new construction units that were developed, but there was a lot of preservation of existing housing that did occur. So there was opportunities there to certainly expand the life of the existing housing, to add amenities to the housing that were not previously provided for, especially early on when developing affordable housing was very formulaic, and it was very utilitarian. And so we were able to add additional amenities and connectivity within both the exterior, improved landscaping, and also and add additional interior amenities for the residents that was not previously there. So there's always been the need, especially for affordable housing for those who are earning a lower income in rural communities. But it's been a challenge for public funders to support because of the declining populations in rural Oregon. Now, I'm hearing that there's actually a trend toward increasing populations in rural communities in Oregon. So we may see that shift, and it's already starting to happen gradually. The other thing that we do have to face when we're developing, especially farm worker housing in tiny communities, is the NIMBY factor. So that's something that we always have to be really well prepared for when we enter a small community. You're going into a small community of less than 10,000 in population, and suddenly you're going to build, a 40 to 50 unit housing development for farm workers, and it can really raise a lot of concerns. A lot of that is based simply on just a lot of racist attitudes, and in this day and age, right now, we're dealing with a lot of anti-immigration sentiment as well. So we have to be really well prepared as developers in rural Oregon in this day and age to deal with those kinds of pushbacks. But the housing demand is there. The agricultural business community supports the housing, and the city governments also support the housing because they know they need the housing for all of the agricultural businesses in the rural Oregon.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat. Let's go to them. One of them is, I think this is generally, this is for designers, I think. How do you approach trauma-informed spaces in your buildings, not just in the community room, but throughout the building? So who would want to take that on?
I can take that one. Trauma-informed design is a relatively recent term that's becoming very popular, but the ideas behind it aren't really anything new. I think the major things we try to do, that we've always tried to do with good design, is to provide intuitive wayfinding, making buildings legible so that you know where you're supposed to go, where you're not supposed to go, by always having a connection to nature as much as possible. So whether it's daylight or access to views, and then also just creating environments that are pleasant to be in, that aren't jarring, that aren't visually upsetting. Those are sort of the three things that I always keep in mind for trauma-informed design. There's other aspects as well, but they're kind of just like what I would consider aspects of good design. And those, you're right, they don't have to just be in the community room, but that's how doing a good unit, a dwelling unit, is just as important to keep those things in mind as well. So that's what we try to do at Holst.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Anybody else?
I could add to that too, that the services provided by developer and the owner of the project are as important as the units themselves, and most places now provide case management within the building. So there is someone there who will go to your unit and meet with you one-on-one to kind of help with case management. So those support services are really, really important to success.
If I can, I'd love to add in a little bit too, that it's important to just consider the population that you're serving, because what's trauma informed for one population may be trauma inducing for a different population. We see that in elements such as corridors to the units themselves. For certain populations, an exterior corridor where there's not the typical enclosed hallway is in fact trauma informed. For other populations, not having exterior entrances works the other way, I think, and sometimes that's down to the individual level, not just the particular trauma. Thinking specifically about survivors of domestic and sexual violence, those exterior versus interior entrances can be very triggering in one way or another. Those are interesting discussions that we've had about some of our projects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question we have is, the person says, I'd love to hear a bit about culturally specific engagement and design that is responsive to BIPOC communities. Who'd like to answer that?
Well, I can talk a little bit about that. In my work at Hacienda, and actually a bit of my work at Casa of Oregon, we provide housing Hacienda is a Latino-led organization, and so we just by reputation, we do get a lot of immigrants who apply to our housing developments. And then we get affiliated with a variety of different organizations that provide services to the immigrant population that we serve. And these immigrants come from both Mexico, Central and South America, as well as countries in Africa. So it's a very, very diverse population that are being served in the Hacienda properties. And it's very important when you're serving a culturally specific group that you identify leaders within the population who can help connect you to the population. And you bring them along by having their leaders get involved in various community engagement efforts and help us reach out to those communities. And we just identify those leaders, provide them coaching, and just get them involved and helping us reach as broadly as possible the culturally specific group that we want to serve. And there's a variety of, and of course, and that includes bringing in language interpreters as well, who can help us do simultaneous translating, if at all possible, so that while we're presenting in English, the folks who are there can receive simultaneous translation. There is technology now that allows us to do that. So that's what we have been doing at Hacienda.
Mm-hmm. Akasha?
On that. Thanks, Joseph. So I used to be at MWA Architects, and part of one of their initiatives with trying to develop a project on PCC, they worked with Amar Perez, who's a critical race theory and embeds critical race theory into design. And one of the things that I hadn't even done a check on was just even our thinking of what good design is really based in Eurocentric values of what makes people feel comfortable, or even with wayfinding, right? Like everything that we learn in design school is based on a Eurocentric modes and values, right? And so what she uncovered was at PCC, they did this huge project. A lot of us have been to the new campus that they have on Killingsworth. And a lot of the students of color feel unwelcome and exposed in these spaces that we think are great and open, right? We love those spaces that feel very bright and white and clean and have this like clean design and are very minimalist. And to them that felt aggressive, right? To them that felt like they weren't being protected. It felt like they were on display. It felt like all of these other things. And so it's about really even just trying to mine what we believe to be good design, what we've been taught, and to look around and really rethink who we're looking at and who we're taking those cues from. Because again, our schooling, our pedagogy is all rooted in Eurocentric modes of design. And so in order for us to really try to design for BIPOC communities and to really try to start from at a level playing field where we're taking everybody's input as equal and valuable, especially when you talk about trauma-informed design. I think what Travis said is exactly correct. When you look at, somebody who has DV trauma versus somebody who has sex trafficking trauma, et cetera, you're coming at it from a different place. So really realizing that when we're designing for these communities, we can't come with our notions of what is good and what is right and what is best. We have to really try to start with understanding what they feel and how they will appreciate and interact with a space.
Mm-hmm. Question number 3 on the chat. How are you dealing with the COVID crisis? I'm especially worried about the farm workers in rural areas who are crowded together. Has anybody had any design response to COVID?
Yeah, it's a big concern now. There are certainly services that are quickly forming, and there are resources that are quickly forming to provide PPE equipment to the farm workers who are still working. And so we've started to address it that way. And in terms of the design of housing, it's actually a big question we have right now is how are we going to design with COVID in mind? And I'm sure this isn't the first time we're going to be dealing with this sort of public health issue, particularly with regard to the impact that we're all going to experience with climate change. So we are starting to think much more deeply about how we need to design. The other issue that's a really it's a really big equity issue in rural Oregon is the connectivity to high-speed Wi-Fi. It's just non-existent, and so in so many areas. And so we're really, again, starting to figure out for ourselves and with others how we're going to address that issue of inequality with regard to connectivities to high-speed Wi-Fi. And we are looking for resources now to help us identify funding and partners to begin to address that. It's going to be essential for all housing that there is that connectivity for all the residents.
Mm-hmm. Do we have time for another question?
I think maybe, one more.
Yeah, how are we for time?
We have 12 minutes.
Okay, so
maybe 2 more if we go fast.
Okay, one of the questions in the chat is how do you approach a community that is vehemently against affordable housing? So you've talked about this, Rose. Has anyone else experienced this? A proposed building and then the neighbors come out up in arms because they think their property values will go down or think crime will go up. What happens?
Right. Yeah, we're dealing with that right now with our farm worker housing development in Lebanon, Oregon. And there was initially public support for the housing, and then the neighbors started to come out and are now objecting to the farm worker housing development, as well as some other development potential that this particular site has. And so we are in the process now of just collecting data to counter all of their anti-arguments. like, and this is in my mind, this is just racism. But the issues that they're bringing up are increase in crime. First off, a decrease in their property values, and so on and so on. So, we're going to demonstrate to them, given the development of other rural housing projects that we've developed throughout Oregon, that this just is not a fact at all. We develop housing that is going to become a community asset. We're not going to get increased crime. We are not going to impact property values. And so we have to demonstrate to the neighbors, and we have to share that information in a way that they are going to hopefully hear us, and we're going to be as culturally sensitive as we can to our rural neighbors. But we do have to be ready to counter all the anti-arguments that we're dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can add to that too, in that, as I said, more recent projects, people are thrilled about affordable housing, but 10 years ago we did a project called Stevens Creek Crossing in Hillsdale that had two very oppositional neighborhood associations on either side. And we find that involving them in the design process, so don't just present when you're halfway through the design process what you're doing to them, but ask them in the beginning, what do you want, and involving them in the design process kind of eases their concern. So
I definitely support that. Our big challenge right now is COVID. We're not able to have all those one-on-one group gatherings that allow us to build those relationships. And that is particularly challenging. And I would say definitely get in there early, get to know your neighbors, get them involved, help them with your visioning of the project. But right now it's particularly challenging.
Can I just say one more thing? And I just hate to I just want to bring in a little bit more context besides what Rose is saying and what Diana is saying. That rhetoric, that thinking that your property values will decrease and that there will be crime that will come in your community if you diversify your community, is one that was a part of our thinking in this country for a long time. It's what promoted white flight so many years ago. It's something that is a part of the legacy of our country, and so it's not just about you can't just completely combat it by allowing people to be a part of the design process, because you're trying to dismantle systemic racism, and that's what it was about, right? It was about saying we're going to create this idyllic community, and we're not going to allow people of color to buy a home, because that's what our redlining and all of these other policies did, was say that we view communities with people of color as being less valuable. So it's not simply just, having the conversation and making the relationships. We are actually trying to combat centuries of rhetoric that says that when people of color come into your community, there is more crime and your property values decrease, because that is what happened by design.
There's a question here. How are you approaching community design during the pandemic? Oh, it's a similar question. How do you respond to technological constraints while meaningfully engaging both urban and rural communities? Who wants to take that on?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Can you repeat that?
Well, it seems to be in two parts, but the first part is, how are you approaching community design during the pandemic? Okay. So I think that means how can you involve people in the design process if no one can show up for meetings?
Right now we are just, as I said, it's hugely challenging in rural areas in particular, because there's just lack of technology. And then also there's a lot of folks who just aren't familiar with the technology. You know, what we are ending up doing most often is having conference calls. That's something that anyone can easily just dial into, and we can have, you know, conversations and get them involved in using, you know, that old-fashioned technology of just calling in and getting on a conference call. We have been, it's hit or miss of whether or not we can do Zoom meetings and or any kind of you know, teleconference meeting with residents and neighbors in rural communities. And that's even true also in some urban areas where the residents in housing that is being preserved do not have the technology.
Mm-hmm. And I have one last question. Has anyone heard anything about converting buildings that are suddenly not much use, like shopping malls and things like that, into housing? Because as people discovered, you know, you don't need to go anywhere anymore. You can just stay home, do everything from home. Mm-hmm. Maybe it'll free up some space somewhere.
It's a great idea. And there's going to be lots of buildings available very soon. I sat in on a conference call last week from commercial brokers who were lamenting the fact that they're going to see a deep decline in development of new commercial buildings, and they're going to see lots more vacancies in existing commercial buildings. And the way of the future for many workers is going to probably going to end up with a lot more people working from home. So there's going to be less demand. And so that means there's going to be a lot of buildings available that can be converted. And I hope that we're all thinking about that, and that our local governments are thinking about that and figuring out how we can begin to convert those large commercial buildings into housing and shelters and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add to that. I think it's a great idea. However, with rezoning and with permits, it's also a little bit difficult to do that. But I think the conversation needs to be shifted a little bit more towards does the federal government give us more 4%, 9% LIHTC funds, and relooking at, will the 4% actually be 4% funding? Because I think looking at the funding in order to go ahead and do rezoning for properties like that, that's why a lot of developers don't go ahead and do those things now. There's a lot of developments that we could be doing, but there's a lot of factors that weigh in, especially with COVID right now, where bankers are less leaning towards giving out more funds right now. Mm-hmm. So that's just another layer on top of that to think about.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, just as we're getting into the nitty-gritty, the LIHTC discussion, I'm gonna take over to say thank you very, very much to Joseph and to our panel. I appreciate, you know, all of your comments, and I'm thinking especially about Akasha's last comment. You know, this is in the context of spatial justice, which is correcting or attempting to correct for spatial injustices. Racism embedded in the built environment that's been going on for way too long. So that's what we're doing, and thank you everyone for coming. So thank you panelists, thank you facilitators, thank you to Diana, Olivia, and Allison from MWA for being my co-conspirators, and to sponsors, which are University of Oregon and Design Week Portland and MWA. I just put in a little link in the chat. If there are burning questions, something you forgot to say, something you're not sure was written down properly, send me a note through the link I just sent. And this has been recorded, and when it gets posted, I will send that to you as well. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much.